The war wasn't over when the South surrendered. That was just the beginning of a new struggle to rebuild a shattered economy, to redefine labor without slavery, and to answer the question no one wanted to face. What does freedom mean when you have nothing? This is the untold economic story of how the Civil War reshaped America. By 1863, the war had drained both blood and treasure, but momentum was shifting. The Union had begun to harness its economic power with precision. Under General Ulysses S. Grant in the West and General William Tecumseh Sherman in the South, the North no longer aimed just to defeat Confederate armies. It aimed to destroy the Confederate economy. This was total war. Factories, railroads, farms, all became military targets. Sherman's famous March to the Sea was more than a military campaign. It was economic warfare. His troops destroyed rail lines, burned cotton fields, and tore apart supply chains that held the Southern economy together. Why? Because cotton wasn't just a crop. It was the Confederacy's currency, their leverage with Europe, their promise of recovery, their national identity. When cotton burned, so did Confederate confidence. Meanwhile, Grant pressed toward Richmond. His strategy was simple but brutal. Wear down the South's limited manpower and resources through relentless engagement. He knew the Union could afford the losses. The South couldn't, and the results were catastrophic, especially for the Southern economy. By late 1864, Confederate money was almost worthless. In some areas, $1 in gold was worth over $60 in Confederate paper. Inflation wasn't just a statistic, it was starvation. Bread riots broke out, food supplies vanished, and enslaved laborers, once considered the foundation of Southern productivity, were leaving plantations in growing numbers. With Union armies nearby, many freed themselves, weakening the South's economy from within. The war wasn't just being lost on the battlefield, it was being lost on the balance sheet. If this story is helping you see the Civil War in a new light, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. What do you think was the biggest long-term impact of the Civil War on the U.S. economy? Let's explore the legacy together. Drop your thoughts below. By the spring of 1865, the Confederacy was crumbling, militarily, politically, and economically. Its currency had collapsed. Trade was non-existent. Cities like Atlanta and Richmond lay in ruins. Railroads were twisted metal. Farms were scorched earth. Cotton exports, once the backbone of Southern wealth, had dropped by over 90%. Confederate soldiers were deserting. Supplies were gone. Morale had vanished. On April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. The war was over, but peace didn't mean recovery. The South had lost not only the war, it had lost its entire economic model. Enslaved labor, once valued at over $3 billion collectively in 1860 dollars, was now gone. For slaveholders, it was as if their property had vanished overnight. They didn't just lose labor, they lost what they believed was capital. Banks that had loaned money using enslaved people as collateral went under. Insurance companies collapsed. Southern states were bankrupt. Entire plantations were abandoned. Meanwhile, the federal government faced its own financial reckoning. The Union had spent more than $2.5 billion on the war, a staggering amount for the time. National debt had increased more than 15-fold. To manage this, the U.S. had introduced income taxes, expanded the greenback system, and strengthened federal control over the banking sector. War had forced America to modernize its finances and centralize its economy. The Civil War had begun as a fight over states' rights and slavery. It ended as a transformation of what the American economy would become. The question now wasn't how to win. It was how to rebuild. With the war over, the United States faced a new challenge: healing a divided economy. The South lay in ruins, its infrastructure destroyed, its banks collapsed, its labor force emancipated but unprotected. Formerly enslaved people were now legally free but had no land, no pay, and no support system. The question became, what does freedom mean without capital? The federal government launched what would be known as Reconstruction, a series of policies aimed at reintegrating the southern states, rebuilding infrastructure, and redefining labor and citizenship. But rebuilding an economy from ashes isn't just about roads and railways. it's about power. Northern investors moved south, seeing opportunity in cheap land and broken institutions. Some built factories. Others exploited a devastated labor market. The Southern elite, though defeated, began rebuilding their wealth by replacing slavery with sharecropping, a system where freedmen worked land they didn't own for a share of crops they couldn't control. On paper, it was employment. In reality, it was debt bondage. Freedmen were often trapped in cycles of borrowing, paying for seeds, tools, and rent with future harvests. And because merchants set the prices, most laborers ended the year owing more than they earned. It wasn't slavery, but it was economic captivity. Meanwhile, the North debated how far Reconstruction should go. Radical Republicans wanted full rights and land for freedmen. Others, including President Andrew Johnson, pushed for leniency toward the South. In the end, political compromise gutted much of the effort. By 1877, federal troops were withdrawn. The South regained local control, and with it implemented black codes and Jim Crow laws that blocked economic mobility for generations. The Southern economy survived, but only by rebuilding its hierarchy. And the North? Its economy surged ahead. War had expanded industry, centralized banking, and solidified federal power. The foundations of modern American capitalism were laid, not despite the Civil War, but because of it. The Civil War ended with surrender. But the battle over America's economy never really stopped. The South never fully recovered its pre-war wealth. Generational poverty took root in communities of freedmen and poor white farmers alike. Labor remained cheap, and opportunities stayed locked behind social and racial barriers. In the North, industry boomed. Railroads expanded westward. Wall Street became a national force. The federal government emerged stronger, with new power over taxation, currency, and economic policy. The war had redefined what the United States could be, not just politically, but financially. But it came at a staggering cost. Over 600,000 lives, billions in damages, a divided legacy written into every institution that followed. The Civil War was fought with muskets and maps, but beneath it all, it was a war of money, labor, and control. And just like every great conflict, it left behind a scar, one that still shapes who holds power, who builds wealth, and who gets left behind. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. What do you think was the biggest long-term impact of the Civil War on the U.S. economy? And if you haven't seen part 1 yet, click the recommended video right here to start from the beginning.